So we're in Blackbird Studio A. You can hear the chamber going over there. And we have 2 drum setups going. So I'm with Nate. How are you, Nate?
I'm good. How are you?
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We've been tracking.
We've been playing a lot of drums.
And what we did is we had 2 completely different drum setups.
Yes.
But the interesting thing is they shared the same room mics. We kept the M50s, which are up here, open. And we kept the Coles open. And I've got to be honest, this is Lowell's miking technique for the Coles. And it's freaking awesome. Great. We are stealing this. But, of course, a big part of the sound is the chamber, which is this. It's like... And, the fact that it has a C24, a stereo C12, otherwise known as a C24. Funny how they came up with that.
It's weird, 12 times 2?
12 times. Oh, wow.
Math is weird.
So how did you feel? We tracked the first drums in here.
Yeah, we did kind of this tighter room, smaller, vibier, like old Ludwig Club date kit. And I picked some cymbals that were a little bit more appropriate for the tighter sound, a little bit more vintage, drier snare drum, everything just kind of like, there's no length to it. And for me, that makes me play a certain way. And starting on this felt great because everything sounds really full and really snappy. I know you said the snare was like really snappy, which I'm really happy about that sound. But it's like, it just makes you play a certain way because there's not a length to the note. And you have to balance your cymbals and your snare drum and play a little lighter on cymbals to accommodate that. Because you don't want to, I started playing and I hit the crash on the right and I was like, oh gosh, that was too much. I got to pull back even more. And just the room environment, you just play to the room. And as soon as I moved over to the other kit, it was like night and day.
We tracked live with bass, with the bass player in the live room and you there.
Yes.
And then we finished all the bass tracks and we sent him off home. And then we're like, hey, why don't we do the drums in here? And yeah, this was fun. And obviously I'm going to do a full breakdown of the miking techniques that we used. So this is, obviously we've got a vintage Ludwig. Mm-hmm. And here we've got basically a brand new DW.
Yes, very new.
And you brought your snare in, and it was nice, but it was a little polite considering how rocking we wanted it to be. So we did what any rational person would do. We got a Tama bell brass.
I'm living the dream right now.
And it's just...
I think it's 8 inches deep too. It's a super deep bell brass snare, Tama. Great.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
And it was perfect. It made me play completely differently because of how it carried in this room.
Great.
It cuts right through. And
Jacqueline had left the room, the artist had left the room while we were getting set up, because it was quick, because we'd already set up all the mics. We shared a lot of pre's. Obviously, all the room mics had already been set up. So we got tones pretty quickly. All we did was swap out the compressor on the overheads. Other than that, it was like super quick. And so she walked in the middle of the tracking and was like, she'd already was really happy with the drum sound from the other room, but this definitely took it to the next level.
It was playing, and I had to like stop and tell the guys in the class, like, hey, like this is a big difference for a drummer to play in this big of a space. Like I felt way more comfortable on those 3 takes that we did. It was just like, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like to me, because I've been referencing some 9 Inch Nails stuff, really specifically like everything is exactly the same. that track
Yep.
has this big, like when I hear it, I go, oh, that's a big room, lots of room mics, shotgun snare, like, you know, a heavy feel to it. And that's what I was hearing when I started playing in here. And it was like, oh, yeah, now I can do these ideas I have with more confidence because I'm not worried about as much about overplaying cymbals or having to balance that dynamic. I just could like balance everything more evenly instead of having to play light on one hand and heavy on the other. So it worked really well for me, and I'm super happy with how it sounded.
It sounded phenomenal.
Yeah.
It sounded really cool.
Great.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
No problem.
So in here, as you can tell, the ambience is gone. There's probably a little bit coming from that room, but it's pretty darn dead. And we experimented with some drum mics. We originally had a FET 47 on the front, and we weren't really digging it. It just wasn't getting the air of the kick. So we ended up with this gold U87, just pretty fantastic. It's padded because obviously it's taking a lot of sound pressure level. But you know, flat otherwise. And this was the kick, outside kick mic. Inside is a D112. This is an M160, an original M160, which you'll all know from, from Zeppelin, etc. But the Bayer, depending how you want to pronounce it, M160 is a great ribbon, obviously. And in this situation, it's called a Wurst. A sausage mic. I've heard it called many other things as well. But one of the students for the Masterclass was like, hey, can we try that? And of course, we did it in Hansa Studios in Germany, in Berlin. And so we wanted to do it again. And overheads are a pair of 67s, measured in phase with the snare, but favoring more the cymbals. The snare is as fairly typical. We didn't break any rules here. We just did a 57, top and bottom. We originally had 421s on the toms, but I wasn't digging them. So we went with a pair of 414s set to hyper. So there's a pair of 414s on the toms, and it came out pretty darn good. He didn't actually play many toms, but they came out pretty well. This is an SM7 on the hi-hat. So it's a fairly simple drum setup. It really, what do we end up with? 2 mics on the kick, 2 on the snare, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 mics, it's not a small amount. There was believe it or not, a shotgun mic, not a shotgun as in like, a traditional, but a shotgun capsule microphone here in stereo. It was very bright, and I'm not sure if we're going to favor it in the mix, but there was that there. Now, we'll talk about the rooms before we move to this other drum kit, because it's shared by both of them. There is, of course, as I was saying earlier, a C24, which is a stereo C12. Hence the C24. So that was set up here and just sounds phenomenal. This is, for those of you who have seen our other Blackbird tours, the ceiling can actually be raised. They nickname it the trash compactor, so you can make it a smaller room or a bigger room. It's pretty high up, so it's quite large. The other mics, room mics that were being shared, and this I think is actually worth spending a bit of time talking about, is a pair of Coles. Now, if we can bring the camera around here for a second, let me clear up. Look at this line of sight here. If you look right at the mics to the snare drum, you'll notice it crosses the middle of the kick into the snare drum. This is Lowell from Blackbird's idea. There's a break in the baffles, and this goes right down the middle of the kick drum and the snare. This makes these stereo room mics so good because the kick is down the middle, the snare is down the middle, and because they're Coles, they're not picking up quite that sizzle of the hi-hats, and it becomes like this really well-balanced drum sound. They sound fantastic. Absolutely amazing. You'll really enjoy hearing them. They're really wonderful. Okay, and then of course, the last remaining ones were these M50s, these Neumann M50s, which are suspended from the ceiling. The way they have these done, as you can see, there's a power supply for the mic and the power all the way up there, and there's a mic panel. It's absolutely crazy. They drop down this here, they set up the mic, they put the mic power supply in there, plug it in, plug in the cable and everything, and then make it go back up there, and then we listen to it. I mean, it's remarkably good. Really, really fantastic. There's so much attention to detail in this room, this beautiful room, which you can make even liver by turning these panels around and making them turn into wood. I don't know how to do it. We didn't want to do it because we liked the way they sounded, but yeah. Oh, I think you just pull it out. There you go. So if we wanted, we could make it even liver like this, which we didn't. It was live enough, especially with all of the chambers and stuff. But yes, it's a really, really fantastic room. And it's amazing that in Studio A, you get all of these rooms because there's another live room the other side, which is insane. So you get 3 different areas you can record drums in. And crazy. And maybe even more if you wanted to get creative. Okay, so overheads. We had 2 sets of overheads. We didn't do Glyn Johns, but we sort of did a fake Glyn Johns. What do I mean by that? Well, we have a 67 pointed over here to the snare, and another one pointed down to the snare. Both of these are 50 inches from the center and 50 inches from each other. So it's basically an equilateral triangle, meaning they're in phase with each other and in phase with the snare. So if we wanted, we could just solo that stereo configuration and get a view of the kit. However, I wanted to do something super, super in phase and have an imagery that was even better still. So we went for an SM69, a Neumann, and this is a stereo pair, an XY pair here. And that was our main overhead sound. And we threw some money at it. This has the Fairchild on it. So, that's really not being cheap, to say the least. Now, snare top was pretty typical for me. 57 top, 57 bottom. The Josephson, which you've heard me talk about before, are on the toms. Hi-hat is a combination of a 57 and a 451, and those are taped together. And that is the blend that I get from Dave Jordan. They're really, really fantastic. Now, last but no means least, and we could have started there, but last but no means least is a D112 inside, but most importantly, a 44, an RCA 44 on the outside. And that was pretty phenomenal sounding. That's actually a John McBride special. It was his recommendation. That's his favorite kick drum sound. So we thought, we're in Blackbird, we're at John McBride's studio, let's do what he recommends. So that's what we did.
Hello, I'm Lowell Reynolds here at Blackbird Studio. I'm one of the staff engineers, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about what we did with our drum tracks. So there were 2 separate kits, one in a small little ISO booth and one out on our bigger floor. And they shared room mics and chamber mics. And almost all of them, I think actually all of them did go through the console. So all of our pre's were these wonderful Neves 8078 pre's. So kick drum. You know, looks like we're cutting a little bit of 330. That's kind of the low mid stuff that muddies up. You know, everything's gonna have that 330 in it. So if we can cut it out in places, we'll take it. And that's what kind of makes your kick drum sound more like a professional kick drum as opposed to say just like a box. Of course, you're gonna boost something really low. These Neves, it's a 56 hertz that we select. Sounds fantastic. You're always going to boost 50 or 60, something like that on a kick drum and on the bass guitar. Kick out mic. You can see this is the RCA 44. We had a lot of it cut of the 330. I mean, that's a considerable amount taken out. And then added a whole bunch of that 54 again. Again, taking out the low mids, adding a whole bunch of low end. Gives you that big, huge kick on the bottom, but the boxiness just goes away. Snare, of course. For this kit, honestly, no EQ on the top. It just sounded great. It sounded great in the room and we didn't want to mess with it. So we're like, let's run with it. Snare compression. Yes. We did use the 1176 blackface on it. Great sounding compressor. You know, you can really get the snap to come through. It's such a fast compressor. And then on the bottom, of course, flip it out of phase. As per usual. On the snare bottom, we've since changed it, but we use this distressor. It was set almost, I believe, let me see here, it was more like, there's 8 on that. And if I remember correctly, it was something like that. Toms, not a lot of EQ. The overheads, we did use this guy here, the old Fairchild 670, basically. The greatest compressor ever made. Love these things. Lots of tubes. There's a reason they're really expensive. It's because they sound awesome. So we ended up using that. And you can see kind of the idea. I believe it was actually the time constants were set to 1 instead of 2. I changed it when we were doing BGVs. Hat on this one, Warren likes to use 2 different microphones. So there's a 57 and a 451. There's a 20 dB pad. And we stuck them together and they just kind of blend really well. So you get a lot of good top end information from the 451 and then you get a lot of body and bite from the 57. See on the small kit, so like on our kick in, kind of the standard, the D112, 390 we kind of cut, 56 boost, roll off everything below 27. And the kick out, we started with a D30, but we ended up going with a U87. It just wasn't sounding quite healthy. And this kind of fixed it for us. On the out mic, we used this guy over here, this 560. And it's kind of just kind of taking out some of these low mids, boosting the top, a lot of 63, and then rolling out some of that really super low stuff. Snare top, we ended up using a 57. And let's see, on the insert of that guy, we had this here API 550A, giving it some top love. Love this thing. And a little bit on the bottom. It sounds fantastic. Bottom mic, another 57. They're just such great classic microphones. Our toms, we started off with 421s. Wasn't quite cutting it, so we went to 414 EBs with the brass capsules. They sound great. Console pre's, straight to tape. And then our overheads, we went with U67s because, you know, you're at Blackbird, why not? They sound awesome. Vintage tubey mics that sounded great. All right, well, that's the signal flow going for both of our drum kits. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having us. All right, goodbye.